Well, welcome everyone. We're so honored to have you here with us for our inaugural seminar series. This is really exciting. My name is Millie Acanero. I work here at Masonic Medical Research Institute.
And I'm Terry Byrne-Patello with Mohawk Valley Living. So welcome to you all.
And thank you to all those who joined virtually as well. So just so you all know, we do have some guests here who will send questions via the chat that we'll be checking. So MMRI and MV Living, we created this idea as a way for the public to get expert insights on some of society's trending health and science topics. And we're so excited to introduce this topic.
Yes, it's the Ozempic effect, unpacking the scientific and societal impact. And this series is sponsored by CNY Brain and Spine and by Excelis Blue Cross Blue Shield. So we thank them for their partnership on this.
And without further ado, I think we'd like to get started and introduce our panel experts.
So first introducing Dr. Michael Kelberman. Hello. Thank you for coming. He is a senior partner at Central New York Cardiology and medical director of cardiology at Mohawk Valley Health System. He received his bachelor's from Hamilton College and his medical degree from Upstate Medical University, where he also completed his residency, including an additional year when he was selected as chief resident. He then completed a 3-year fellowship in cardiovascular medicine. He is board certified in internal medicine, cardiovascular disease, and interventional cardiology by the American Board of Medical Specialties.
And I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Maria Contaridis, who is the Executive Director at Masonic Medical Research Institute. She is the first woman to serve in the role as Executive Director here at MMRI in its 60-year history. She joined us from Harvard Medical School, and she received her undergraduate degrees from the University of Florida and subsequently went on to Yale University, where she obtained her master's degree in pharmacology, as well as biomedical and biological sciences, as well as her PhD. So we do want to let you know this is an interactive discussion. So we will have our panelists begin by talking on some specific topics, but from there we really encourage you all to ask questions as they arise. We have some questions on hand that guests have already sent to us that we're excited to ask, and those of you who are here virtually, please just feel free to send them in the chat and we'll be reading them as we go. All right, so let's get started. So to start, what is Ozempic and what does GLP-1 actually mean?
I'm always nervous here because I'm here with Dr. Kelperman, who's a role model for me and also a clinician. So I'm a researcher, so I can get to the bottom of a lot of these. So GLP-1 is basically a secreted hormone that comes from the gut after you eat. It's a naturally secreted hormone, but under conditions of insulin resistance as we age, those levels actually drop as you get older, and therefore it causes some metabolic deficits, and that leads to increased body weight over time. If you want to add anything to that.
So, well, first of all, welcome everybody, and this is my idea of fun. So I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I do. You know, this is sort of like, this is what I do all day. Consider it just a big doctor's visit, you know. And we should have that exchange, because I was telling Dr. Contaridis earlier, it really should take quite a while for a doctor to help a patient understand this and help a patient make a decision, because none of it's black and white. Even though it's passed off as black and white in the media or however else you may get your news, it's much more complicated than that. And you also have to consider that I have probably a different perspective than you would as a patient, because I've been doing this for 35 years. I know, I don't look that old, right? And it's a really interesting perspective, because reading about how things evolve is very different than living through them. I understand what experts know, and I understand what experts may not know, and you get humbled pretty quickly over time. So I think that understanding our perspective, because that's going to come up a lot today, is should we do this type of thing, and why should we do it if we're going to do it? And you really have to, it's not a question that's answered in isolation. It's a question that is answered for you specifically, not for your neighbor, not for the things you're reading about, not, for some study. It's really about the patient. So you should understand a little bit about what the stuff is, but you should understand as much or more about the implications of it. So I think the easiest way to understand this is that we have watched increasingly over 30 to 40 years as people in our country have become more unhealthy. And I was telling this to someone earlier. It used to be that we would see someone and we say, well, that person's overweight or heavy. Well, that's not healthy. Well, we really couldn't tell you why. Well, what's unhealthy about it? Well, they're heavy. That's unhealthy. But what was happening? And we really didn't understand it. And it wasn't really until the obesity epidemic that we started to get a feel for what's actually going on. That's where medical scientists would come in because they've helped us answer some of these questions. And I think when we talk about your overall health, it turns out that the metabolic state of a person is, if not the most important thing, it certainly supersedes almost everything else. And how you create healthy metabolism is crucial. And it can be done naturally, of course. It can be done through assistance with medications. There's other ways to do it. But ideally, you do this in a package, and you do it together with a healthcare professional who understands. Unfortunately, we work in a very dysfunctional healthcare system. It's absolutely broken. Take it from me, it's broken. And until it implodes, it won't get fixed. It's not a matter of money. There's tons of money in the system. And that's not the problem. It's much more complicated than that. But in order to get a lot of our patients to good health, we have to struggle to get them to understand why we're doing this and understand some of the concepts that Dr. Contreras was explaining about what is obesity, what is diabetes, what is hypertension. So without taking too much time, and I just want you to have a little bit of background about the way I would think as a cardiologist. So some really simple things to understand. Hypertension, which I know is not the topic tonight, but these things are all tied together. People who are hypertensive, about 2/3 of the hypertension in this country is fueled by poor diet, being overweight, and salt intake. Diabetes, probably pretty similar. There are actually people who are thin who have diabetes. It's not always fueled by obesity, but the majority of people, it's diet and obesogenic habits that create these diseases. And when you fix the underlying problem, these diseases go away. Very elegant trial called the SPRINT trial. All things being created equal among the patients, top number of 115, the systolic pressure, top number of 135. These people at 135 had double the amount of heart attacks and strokes. Make it 145, triple. Simple thing like that. And look how complicated we make it. In this country, which throws $5.7 trillion at the healthcare system every year, more than the economy of every country in the world except China, and we can't get it right. Half the people are not diagnosed, and of the other half are undertreated. Simple thing like hypertension. So when you get to a complicated topic like this, which should be explained over the course of several visits with your doctor, and a dysfunctional system, you can see why there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of things don't get understood well. So these forums, which are really like big office visits, this is an attempt by us to try and help you understand, not maybe on an individual basis, but at least on a more global basis, why you might want to think about a drug like this. I'll state up front that I'm a proponent of these medications. That doesn't mean I think they should be used by everyone. It doesn't mean I don't think there aren't concerns. I'm just a proponent in the big picture because I see what's happening out there. And I've been doing this for 35 years and I cannot find a way to health for 99% of people. So this is, to me, something very useful. And I'm sure that'll come up. So that's sort of a clinical introduction.
Yeah, and I'll add a little something to that as well. So I'm less of a proponent. I'll start with that. Not that I don't think people should be given GLP-1 agonists and the like, but I think there should be more cautiousness with regards to who takes them, what dose, and how it's handled, because everyone hears about the superficial. I wouldn't call it superficial because there are molecular things that are changing to help alter people's health, but people are taking them for the purposes of losing weight, which is a side effect, if you ask me, of what you really want to take them for, which is reducing risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, and other things. And so I hear a lot of people who say, I need to lose 10 pounds, I have a wedding over the summer. This is not for those people. And I think these days, when you can get access to these medications without the proper clinical guidance, where you don't understand the risks, I think that's when it becomes a problem for people. Because these drugs don't just cause you to lose weight, fat, you lose muscle, you lose bone. For women in particular who are in the menopausal years, it becomes a high risk because you're already at risk for osteoporosis, and now you're losing bone density. So that could be a huge risk to think about. Just to show that we're looking at both sides of the story.
Yeah, I think you'll hear a balanced perspective. So just for some historical perspective, these drugs and this mechanism was really discovered back in 2005. It's been 20 years that they've been going at it. The first drug, and I forgot the name of it, beginning with an E, but it was dosed twice a day by injection. Not a very good medication to give people. It was thought to be a diabetes drug. And another interesting perspective on diabetes, and it shows you sometimes you do stuff and you just by accident run into something. That happens a lot in science, as I'm sure Dr. Contreras can testify to, which is fine. But for years, we were giving diabetes drugs to, and I'm a cardiologist, but I am really into this metabolic aspect of health. For years, we were giving oral pills for people that were diabetic, much of it fueled by being overweight. They would lower the sugar. But we never, using all those drugs, ever saved a life. There was no, what the word scientists use is mortality benefit. There was no mortality benefit and barely any morbidity benefit, which is just illness, not death. So we were controlling sugar, but we really weren't helping people. I mean, I know it sounds like a strange thing to hear, but it's important for you to understand the difference between that. And at the end of the evening, I'm gonna say something that I think people should walk away hearing, but I won't say it quite yet. So over these 20 years, we've discovered a lot about these drugs, and the weight loss was not anticipated. That was really a big surprise. And I'll say something else, which you'll hear several times today, which is we don't know everything about these medications. We don't even know exactly how they work in every respect. Certainly the weight loss is somewhat explained, but not totally explained. Now, before you decide that you should leave the symposium tonight after hearing that, it may scare you, but that's true about a lot of medicines we use. We don't understand everything about many of the medicines we use. We understand something about them, but not everything. And even a medication that is used by 55 million people in this country for 30 years, statin drugs, we're still discovering certain things about them. Now, we study these drugs clinically, and we decide if they're useful, if they save lives, if they don't save lives, if they enhance morbidity or mortality. We do all that, but we have to watch these things very carefully over the years. It turns out just, really the last few years, high dose of the two strong statin drugs, even though they save lives, causes a bit of insulin resistance, and you can get more propensity for diabetes. Now, all this time, you would think we would have known that a long time ago, but that's how hard it is sometimes to figure this stuff out. So we do know a lot about the medicines we use, but we don't know everything, and we know something about these medications. And that's where Dr. Contreras is coming from. We don't know everything about them. Now, we do have large databases. There's this stuff is being used like wildfire. There's 40 million people now that have used it in the United States. And some of the, they call them registries, some of the people who've been registered that have been followed are in the several 100,000. So we are getting large databases and at least getting slightly more secure that some of the concerns aren't as bad, perhaps, as we thought. But nevertheless, not fully worked out.
Maybe I'd like to start by highlighting some of the cardiovascular differences. So a lot of these trials that Dr. Kelberman has been referring to have primarily focused on individuals who have diabetes and are obese. So they're not specifically tailored yet on just focusing on the effects of these medications strictly on those that are overweight without a comorbidity. So that's in progress. And I think the United States population tends to be one of the biggest clinical trials in this regard because there are a lot of people now taking it just for the sole purposes of obesity. But the trials that Dr. Kelberman is referring to have comorbidities associated with taking these medications. And what they have discovered in almost all of them, I will say, is that there are unexplained or somewhat explained cardiovascular benefits that are independent of the weight loss. And that's the part that I think is worth really discussing with people because there is improvement in morbidity, which is the benefit of improving cardiovascular health based on metrics like how long they can run on a treadmill or walk on a treadmill or improvements in ejection fraction in the heart and so on. But some of these trials have not shown, and most of them have not been used as metrics to measure mortality. And there's a difference. Mortality is the incidence of individuals who still die of health disease. And a part of that is to recognize that while they are improving a lot of these cardiovascular functions, either we have not yet measured whether they can improve mortality, or some of the studies have actually shown that they don't improve mortality any more than any other medication. So they're not beneficial. Or that they are not beneficial, at least in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. In HFpEF, I think it still remains to be determined. So there is some indication that it's improving cardiovascular function, but it's not necessarily translating into improved overall life, longevity. And that's where I think we need to do a lot more research. And one of the things that Dr. Kelberman talked about was high blood pressure. These medications actually don't or only modestly improve hypertension and only modestly improve the need for needing statins. So there isn't much improvement on those two parameters. So they're not meant, even if you lose weight, to replace your hypertensives or your anti-cholesterol medications. You still will need to take those in addition to your Ozempic, even if you lose weight and your cardiovascular function improves. As yet, those have not been shown to be hallmark downstream markers for these types of medications.
So the two easy things that I say to patients to help understand that sort of elegant explanation, we treat patients, not numbers. And that is a huge mistake that goes on in modern healthcare. Healthcare tends to be practiced by algorithm and by check marks today. We treat patients, not just numbers. Number two, and sometimes it's easier to understand concepts if you take them to an extreme. If I don't save someone's life, if I don't help them live a day longer, what exactly am I doing? I think about that every day, because when you ask people to do things, yes, something gets better, but does the patient live longer? Are they doing better? Are you taking risks for good reason? You always have to answer that question. And I tell you, that question is not asked very often. And that's a core component of good healthcare. What are you trying to accomplish? And that's why statin drugs are a perfect example. Cholesterol is one component of the overall risk for heart disease. And you'll see this explode in the next 5 years as these genomes get identified that are closely associated with heart disease risk. There are people that can have high cholesterol, but they don't develop heart disease. And there's people that have low cholesterol that do. And there's things that just are perplexing. If I was a patient, I would really wonder about this. I mean, the average bad cholesterol of a person that has a heart attack in the United States is less than the recommended goal of the US government. Well, how can that be? How can something be okay if everyone's having heart attacks? So that's because the thoughtfulness that goes into these things is simply not deep enough. And it's very hard to convey important concepts in little bullet points. And so you need a good healthcare practitioner to help you sort through this, who not only understands it themselves, but can explain it and help a patient figure it out. In relation to what Dr. Contreras said about the study endpoints that don't involve mortality, as she said, yes, it's true. Some things are surrogate markers and they're not always that helpful, but they can be key components of overall health. And when you lose weight and you improve blood pressure and you lower cholesterol, you have to be careful. Sometimes a year, that's a short time. These are things that are long-term. Heart disease starts over many, many years. The process of hardening, what we call hardening of the arteries or atherosclerosis, that's a diffuse systemic process that builds up over many years, and it gets interrupted acutely at various times by plaque that become vulnerable and rupture. Like I said about being in the business a long time, I didn't know that when I started. We thought they were like pipes. It was like a plumbing problem. Now we learned somebody describes it as a donut and a donut hole. The problem isn't so much in the donut hole, it's in the donut. It's in the vessel wall. That's where the trouble starts. Unstable plaque. That's where the disease process is. And then the actual hole gets involved when the donut has a problem. So you have to stabilize the donut. And how do you do that? So these are concepts that make it a little bit easier to understand. So the hope, not completely proven, the hope is that by attacking one of the components of poor health, which is obesity and the whole pro-inflammatory environment that obesity creates, the hope is that you can stabilize vessels, make them healthier. Weight loss is a component of it, but one of the fascinating things about the SELECT trial, which was the big trial with Ozempic, the curve for improvement in health started long before the weight loss. And so that's where we began to realize that this anti-inflammatory mechanism, whatever mechanism it is, and there's many postulated mechanisms, was as important as the actual weight loss. Now, when you lose weight, there's a lot of, and we didn't know this either, there's a lot of pro-inflammatory cytokines and basically just chemicals and hormones floating around that create poor health. They wreak havoc over time. They cause heart muscle to fibrose, they cause blood vessels to inflame and get disease, and it's like a fire and putting kerosene on it. And so these concepts are all being understood now, and when we see something that interferes with that and we see improvement, we get excited because we think we're onto something. So that's sort of where we are, but you want to be careful not to get the cart ahead of the horse, which is what's happening.
I think that's actually an excellent point, that these diseases actually start a long time. They take a long time to build up to where you are when you need these medications, and the weight loss might be acutely better for your body, so that manifests in improvements in cardiovascular parameters, but the morbidity component of it may not be caught up yet. The question will become, which I think is an interesting question for research, is can you actually reverse that? Can you actually go back in time and kind of de-escalate where you've gotten to now that you have had to now use these medications? So I think that's a question that will come in due course.
And I'm obviously a fan of modern science and modern medicine, but facts are facts. There's 800,000 heart attacks every year in the United States, one every 40 seconds. So you set your watch. It's really incredible, and we have made very little impact on that. If you have a heart attack and you get to the hospital, we're way better at saving your life now. but we're not nearly as good at preventing it. So, when there's enthusiasm for something like this, you can sort of understand it. We are very excited by these findings. Researchers are, by the very nature of what they're doing, they get very excited about these things. But how do we apply them wisely to people? How do we keep stuff from becoming bandwagon stuff where everybody just wants it? And then how do you temper sometimes the enthusiasm, to do what Oprah does, or somebody, who you name the famous person who's done it, who do this for losing weight.
Oprah. Oh, Oprah. Oh, you're talking about losing weight. I was going to say have an Oprah show.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, who is it? Katy Perry. I mean, think of a whole long list of people who have suddenly appeared to be very different people.
Maybe we should turn it to you guys or the audience.
So we had a couple questions submitted online. One of them is, as a patient with PCOS who's been on a GLP-1 receptor agonist for 18 months, I've experienced complete resolution of my PCOS-related pain and symptoms, even though my weight loss has plateaued and is no longer my primary concern. What does current research suggest about how GLP-1 drugs affect hormones and metabolism beyond weight loss?
Well, first of all, I will say this: I'm not a PCOS expert, so you should know that. Having said that, though, no, there's been very little research with GLP-1s and PCOS. But PCOS, by the nature of it,
PCOS is polycystic ovary disease.
it's sort of an
Polycystic.
Ovarian syndrome.
Ovarian.
polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, this is a heart doctor telling you about ovaries, so take it with a grain of salt. But most people who have this have a lot of hormonal issues. They have too much testosterone. They have tremendous trouble with their menses. They have all sorts of weight issues, metabolism issues. It's sort of a real prototype. So this drug attacks a lot of those problems, and it's not surprising that people get helped by it. Are we changing anything permanently? I don't know. You do things for many different reasons in medicine. I like to say this to people because I just think it helps them understand our dilemma. So this is a pill I'm holding in my hand. This pill, whatever it is, when it's given in too low a dose, is worthless. When it's given in too high a dose, it will kill you. When it's given in the right dose, it can be a miracle. It's got to be delivered in the right dose to the right organ the right way. And believe me, this is a big problem with certain pills because they get part of it right, but not all of it right. So, this stuff gets very complicated because getting all that correct is difficult. And in PCOS, these are people who really struggle, and it's extremely seductive to do this, have weight loss and have your symptoms be ameliorated. But there's nothing wrong with doing something for symptom relief, even if you don't live a day longer. I mean, when people have bad knees, they don't live longer necessarily by getting their knee replaced, but they feel better. So that's a good goal. There's nothing wrong with that. But, when you're talking about overall health benefit for a population, you'd like to aim higher. I think PCOS has a long way to go before they understand fully what we're doing. But it is absolutely true that some people get tremendous symptom relief.
I can just add a little bit to that. This is just an example of some side effects of these types of medications, the GLPs. And in part, so PCOS is a metabolic disorder, and a lot of the women who suffer from this disease are overweight. So there's no question that weight loss in this case will ameliorate some of the symptoms because PCOS is primarily driven by hyperinflammation. So if you have increased inflammation, which is reduced by these GLP-1s, you're going to get relief of your symptoms. And interestingly, I did look up some of the other potential therapeutic areas that are currently emerging. And this is weirdly one of them, along with other metabolic diseases that are coming up as potential uses for these medications. So I think more to be seen down the road.
So let's go down the body and just talk about where people have gotten very excited about this. And once again, this is not meant to convince you of yay or nay, just so you understand why people are excited about this. So We'll start with the liver. About 20% of the people in the world, I believe, have, once again, felt to be an inflammatory-based condition where they deposit fatty tissue in the liver. It causes slight liver inflammation. A segment of those patients will go on, and we don't know who, will go on to develop liver cancer or cirrhosis. Horrible diseases that have often a lot of mortality associated with it. And the researchers have tried for many years to try and do something about this. Lowering cholesterol doesn't seem to help. Weight loss, if you can do it to some degree, maybe a little bit. So these drugs have shown an uncanny ability to reduce the liver inflammation and even reverse some of the fatty deposits. So obviously important, a great area for research, more to be done, but it gives you sort of an inkling as to how potent these anti-inflammatories are. The brain, a ton of work being done there. I was speaking with a pretty famous, he's very famous in the cardiology world, but he's now a general researcher, a guy named Eric Topol, who's at the Scripps Clinic in San Diego, just wrote a book on healthy longevity. He was referencing all the work with AI that's going on and reshaping these molecules so they can affect different parts of the brain. It's really fascinating. You know, the GLP-1 receptor in the brain, there are some in the brain, they can block those. I was telling Dr. Contreras, they can block those completely in mice. And when they do that, the mice don't lose weight. It's really great, but the anti-inflammatory effects continue. So where the weight loss comes from exactly, we don't fully understand, but the brain is an area ripe for because there's a lot of belief that some of this dementia associated disease is due to inflammation, and obesity, hypertension, all these things cause chronic inflammation, and therefore by blunting that, you hope it can improve people. The early trials have been a little disappointing because they've taken people that already have some dementia, and it may be too late at that point to really help them. The heart, tremendous work going on with the heart. Obviously, stabilizing diseased heart arteries is very important to us. Even if we can't reverse it, can we make that plaque stable? And how do we do that? So that's an area of a lot of research. Dr. Contra just mentioned something that most of you probably haven't heard of, except it's very common. It's what I call, to make it easy to understand, a stiff heart, where people have hypertension, obesity, other inflammatory diseases for many years. The heart actually gets affected and becomes stiff. So the heart has to squeeze, but it also has to relax and take in blood for the next heartbeat. And if you make that relaxation phase slow and stiff, the heart doesn't fill properly. Pressures go up in the heart, it translates back up into the top chamber and into the lungs. People start to feel short of breath, and you can even go into heart failure. So when I started, we never heard of this. About halfway through my career, they started saying, well, there's this thing with the stiff heart thing, and maybe 10 or 20% of people have that. Then I got to maybe around COVID time, and it was half of all people who have heart failure have this. And now in 2025, maybe the majority of people that have heart failure have this. But the phenotype has changed dramatically. And that's what, and if, maybe I'm a little hyper enthusiastic about this, because you have to understand where I'm coming from. So back in the day, I would see an 85-year-old lady, thin, pretty healthy, treated for hypertension. She'd come in the hospital and she'd be in heart failure. Her heart squeezed okay, but she had a very thick heart. A very, very prototypical thing. And we would do some things to try and help these patients. It helped a little bit, wasn't always successful, but that was a typical person who would have a stiff heart. Today it's been flipped on its head. We see that once in a while, but most people are 60 or 70 years old, and they've had obesity, hypertension, etc. for many years, 30 years, most of them. And they come in and they start to feel more short of breath, they start to get more fatigued, they start to get all these associated diseases, atrial fibrillation, sleep apnea, fatty liver. I can tell you, when my eyes close, it's a syndrome. When I have the students with me, I joke with them, they start to tell me about a patient, I say, wait, let me guess. And I pick out all the other things they have without seeing the patient, and they say, how did you know that? Because that's how it is. That's what we see all day long. So these syndromes this has become, so now when I have somebody with atrial fibrillation or a stiff heart, things like that, it's not often the 85-year-old lady who's had a pretty healthy life. It's often a 60-year-old or a 65-year-old who's been in poor health, even though they didn't realize it for these 30 years, and they're coming in with this now, and we're faced with an epidemic of it. So when we get enthusiastic about this, you can see why. If we have some way to interrupt this process, to change this pro-inflammatory state, to help the heart that's getting stiff from all these problems, this is a big deal. Other things, the lungs, sleep apnea. That's a common entity now, very much weight related. Obviously, weight loss would help with that. That's a good one. There's a few other less obvious things, but I'll mention them because I'm sort of big on this. Joint pain, knee pain. It's very common, and if you go to your friendly orthopedic surgeon, I hope there's not, I don't think there's many ortho guys here, they're going to tell you, oh, it's bone on bone, and can fix that, I can give you a new knee and all that. It's true. The reality is, much of this, believe it or not, is a metabolic disease. The cartilage destruction is a result of excess, long-standing inflammation. It isn't just that, yes, being heavy doesn't help, but the answer to knee pain is to eat an anti-inflammatory diet, weight loss, exercise, general health, and you'd be shocked how many people can improve without a knee replacement. Quick study, it's easy to understand, but it points this out. Atrial fibrillation. Someone did a lovely study, which doctors never talk about because they like to do things to people. 100 people here with atrial fibrillation, 100 people here with atrial fibrillation. These people, doctors did their thing with an ablation, took a catheter and they got little lines and they got rid of the AFib the best they could. The other group, under strict supervision, not using GLP-1s, but weight loss, diet, exercise, sleep, stress relief, the whole gamut. But they did it because they were being supervised strictly. At the end of 1 year, same amount of AFib. The doctor ablation, the health change. So these things are health related. And, sometimes doctors they have a tool in their hand and if you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. There are other ways to cure these things. And it's about your health. And we just modern medicine makes it a little bit too much the doing stuff. And, I don't know if GLP-1s will fall in that category. I hope they don't. I hope there's some evolutionary understanding of how they can help people and be used. And we'll probably, I'm sure by the end of this, have some comment on that. But I hope you're understanding a little bit more about how complicated this topic is clinically. It's not as just take this shot and everything is better.
I'm gonna, since you are at MMRI, I will not be able to stop myself from telling you the overarching theme today is that the root cause of a lot of disease is inflammation at the end of the day. MMRI is coming up with a miracle powder. I'll just throw that plug in there, and a lotion for arthritis, soon to be in your fingertips. So just wanted to plug that in there.
Wow, I didn't know that. So I learned something.
We understood it a long time before GLP-1. Yes, questions?
Yeah. A lot. And that's pretty broad, topic. And there's a lot of anti-inflammatories out there that aren't GLP-1s. So why do these other anti-inflammatories not work where the GLP-1s might?
Well, I'll tackle that first clinically, and then Dr. Contreras can do it from a more scientific perspective.
And I'm just going to repeat the question so those online can hear it as well. But we had a question asking why some anti-inflammatories may not work the same as GLP-1s in reducing inflammation.
So just as background, it is true that certain conditions that are highly inflammatory, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, that's a very inflammatory disease of the joints. They do have increased risks of heart disease. We didn't know this for a long time, but it's absolutely true. Now, is it tenfold? No. And can it be offset by other things like being very healthy? perhaps. But pro-inflammatory conditions, other than what we've talked about, do increase the risk of unhealthy blood vessels. In fact, there's seminal work by a guy named Paul Ridker, who's in Boston, who strongly believes in the inflammatory hypothesis of heart disease. In other words, this plaque that builds up in your arteries, it is a pro-inflammatory process with lots of different types of cells. Some of you may have heard of macrophages that come to the site, and the whole process sets up an inflammatory cascade that creates unstable plaque. And that's why these plaques are so vulnerable. That's the word they use. But a more direct answer to the question is inflammation is bad in general, but inflammation, and this is what we don't understand, that comes from this unhealthy obesity seems to be worse. And maybe it's because it's also associated, remember I told you about the sprint trial? By just piling on a little bit of high blood pressure, little by little, your risk starts to really escalate. It's the same thing. If you're diabetic, you have this risk. If you're hypertensive, you have this risk. It's not additive when you have the two. It's synergistic. Your risk is more than 1 + 1. It's 1 + 1 = 3. So it may be that folks who are pro-inflammatory from obesity, for example, many of them have diabetes, many of them have hypertension, many of them have high cholesterol, many of them have sleep apnea. So it's probably the whole cascade that creates that risk. In terms of the anti-inflammatory, there is a strong search for potent anti-inflammatories. There's an old-fashioned one called colchicine. That's the one that was used in Paul Ridker's studies. He has some pretty good data. I check inflammatory markers on everybody. If you have a heart attack and you have X cholesterol on medication, if your inflammatory marker doesn't come down with that medication and it stays high, your risk is threefold the person who responded. So there is something to this. And so I check that because those are a lot of cardiologists don't do this yet. It isn't mainstream. But if someone's not responding the appropriate way, I will attack inflammation with the weak tools that we have. Whether there will be better ones coming out, there's a big search for that.
And I would just add to that to say there's also a difference between acute and chronic inflammation. So in addition to what Dr. Kelberman said, that additive effect is the compounded interest, if you will, of having chronic inflammation and inflammatory markers circulating in your bloodstream all the time. And these markers that are predominantly coming from the heart or to the heart from other tissues are systemic. So it's not that you're, if you have joint pain, it's kind of localized in your knee and you think it's just because of your knee. Those things are circulating in your bloodstream. And so those inflammatory risk factors are affecting not just your knee, they're affecting your heart, they're affecting your liver, they're affecting all your tissues. And so being able to bring that down is really important. And a lot of that, if you think about it from the heart's perspective, if you run and exercise, molecularly, those pathways that get triggered in the heart, the stress the heart feels when you're running, are the same stresses that your heart feels when you have hypertension, when you have obesity, when you have diabetes. The difference is that you stop running and your heart has time to recover and sort of think about ways that heart is actually functioning more as a muscle. It gets stronger because it gets exposed acutely, not chronically. And I think the chronic piece is what's really important, and how we can try to reduce that over time is one of the things I think for people who have risk. This is where the GLP-1s can be really helpful because, again, indirectly, they're reducing inflammation. TNF-alpha is one of them, IL-6. There's a panoply of inflammatory factors. Let me just say it's a library of them. Half of them are good and half of them are bad. They're regulatory cytokines that help reduce inflammation typically, and then there's cytotoxic cytokines that increase inflammation. You want to increase the regulatory cytokines, but reduce the cytotoxic ones. And that's, I think, where the risk, where the GLP-1s can help, because they're reducing two of the most highly toxic cytotoxic cytokines without affecting the regulatory ones. It's a long-winded answer to your question, but really being able to systemically reduce inflammation over time is a better mechanism than maybe even taking it when you feel pain or a headache or joint pain, etc.
I think that's a really important point. Not to make you think this is too complicated, but it's very complicated. So I tell this way because I just think it's easy to understand. There's 37 trillion cells in the body, give or take a million or two here and there. They're all talking to each other, and we are just beginning to understand the language. Nobody dreamed that the gut talked to the brain. When patients, this is a poor thing for a patient, but if a patient comes in with something that happens in their brain, a bleed in their brain or something, I literally will get calls sometimes because the doctor says, "Oh, this patient's not even barely alive, and they have a bleed in their brain. Their EKG looks like they're having a heart attack." Their EKG from their heart is changing because something's happening in their brain. Just today, there was a paper that came out talking about a discovery of heart cells talking to the brain and giving messages. So we are just unfolding this. This whole thing about these incretins are called. These are the class of medicines that we talk about with GLP-1s and gastric inhibitory peptide GIP, because these drugs are coming out with multiple pathways, as you'll probably hear by the end of this. So they're affecting the brain. We had no idea. In fact, I was talking with one of the researchers. Now, I didn't know this because I'm not a neuroscientist, Dr. Kenda is, but Parkinson's, which I guess we all consider a brain disease, right? Apparently, there is a big body of evidence that Parkinson's starts in the GI tract and that it eventually affects part of the brain. And that's how it happened. Now, I'm a heart doctor, not a brain doctor, but I found this stuff fascinating. And at the end of the day, good doctors are going to have to be doctors of all of this. You really need to understand this to take good care of people. The notion that I got my organ and leave me alone, and that's not a good way to be a doctor. You really got to try and understand all of this and be able to put the picture together. But you can see it's complicated, but it's fascinating at the same time.
I agree 100% with that. The gut is actually a really important organ. It turns out that what seeps through your gut is what fuels the rest of your body. And in terms of the inflammatory markers, it's a lot to do with what we eat and the choices that we make. And this is my point about not being it's not that I'm against GLPs, it's against the idea that this is the miracle worker outside of doing the real work, which is making better lifestyle choices. And the lifestyle choices have to be better diet choices. They have to include exercise and protein because you're losing so much muscle mass with these medications. You can't afford to do that, not without guidance.
I was interviewed for an article about 10 years ago, and I said, are we making progress? And I said, we'll make progress when I can go over to Core Life and see a line that's longer than the line outside Texas Steakhouse next door. Usually it's 10-1. I said, when I see that change, I'll know we're making some progress. But here's how it should work, as Dr. Contreras is alluding to. You should take advantage of this opportunity when your brain is getting turned off a little bit. And I tell patients this all the time. This is a great time to change your diet, to change how you do things. It's a drip, drip, drip every day of how we become unhealthy. It's not a sudden thing. I mean, there are sudden things that can happen, but it's a long process, and you have to slowly change it. And the brain is so powerful. It's just unbelievable. In fact, I like to use silly examples because it's easier to understand. And I literally say to the patient, if the students would laugh if they hear this, because they hear this all the time, I don't diminish people's efforts at losing weight because it's difficult. And because you're working against a brain that's worked a certain way, and there's a lot of things that reinforce that. But I tell people, try not to take your next breath. I'll wait. Because nobody can do that. Not a single person can willfully not take their next breath. That's your brain. That's your brainstem doing that. Why do you think other things aren't as powerful? The appetite centers of the body are incredibly powerful. I can go in and I hope Ray Halbert is in here. I can go to Turning Zone and drop $20 and leave and never go back again. Not even if I win. Other people drop $20, lose it, and they go back forever and ever. They can't stop themselves. I mean, there's so much we don't understand about addiction and about habit and about all this stuff. So when you're on a GLP-1 and that key is turned off, that's the perfect opportunity to start to change your diet, try to get healthier. You know, I eat a certain way, and it's been a long process over 20 years, but I enjoy food just as much as everybody else, and I just don't eat that stuff. And there's plenty of great stuff out there. You just have to retrain your brain. But people are addicted. It is an addictive, fierce process. Believe me, I spend all day, every day talking about it. It's really, really hard. I'm very sympathetic, but you have to get from A to B. And you know, the enemy of good is perfect, but you have to try. And so Dr. Contreras is right. If you use that I mean, it may come to pass that you can do bad things and take a shot or a pill. Maybe that'll turn out to be true, but that really is not how you want to do things. You know, at the end of the day, you're going to be healthier. The same thing with statin drugs. If you take a statin drug, I once had another cardiologist come up to me and he said, what's your cholesterol? I said, why? He goes, I want to know what your cholesterol is. So I told him. And he said, well, how do you keep your cholesterol? I said, well, eat this. He goes, my cholesterol is better than yours. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He takes a pill out of his pocket. I just take this pill. And I said, that's not the right attitude. That was a cardiologist who did that. Because really, the pill does one set of things, but the healthy diet does all these other things that Dr. Contreras explained. So it's a health system. You know, that's how you get healthier. And it can seem like a really difficult task. That's why you really need people to help you. It's a difficult thing to go about on your own. And GLP-1s can be the gateway, but they should be a gateway. And we're going to probably by the end of this talk a little bit about strategies. I tell people we're going to go on this, but we're going to have a strategy of trying to reduce the frequency, reduce the dose. We're going to become as least dependent on it as we possibly can. And there's a lot of people trying to work on different strategies for this.
So I want to make 2 points and then we'll get your question. The first is that to Dr. Kelberman's point, it's not something to take lightly when you make the decision because it is a lifelong commitment, pretty much. If you stop taking these medications, you get something called hyperphagia. Your body kind of compensates. You gain back all the weight. I think Jason was telling me in the back that the rate is something like 1 to 3 pounds per month that you gain weight back, and some individuals will gain it back even faster. So you have to be really thoughtful about whether or not this is something you can do if you don't make those lifestyle changes, because you can get down to the weight that you want to be. And then if you make those lifestyle changes, you can work really hard to maintain it. Now, obesity, the other point I wanted to make, is not a disease of people who just are gluttonous. That wasn't what I was trying to imply with the McDonald's examples. It is a metabolic disease. We're starting to understand that sometimes there are some genetic factors that actually play into the fact that you have obesity as a propensity. So it's not something that's completely controlled by an individual. It has to do with a lot of the brain communication to the gut, feeling hungry all the time. And that brings me to the sort of the second issue, not just inflammation, but the other thing that is addictive and terrible for your body, probably the number one cause of adult cancer, is sugar. So that is the other thing that needs to get cut out of a diet, sugar and things that make you pro-inflammatory like obesity. So I apologize.
And the super sugars.
Corn syrup.
High fructose corn syrup. Are you kidding me? Poison that's been given out to people on a regular basis for a generation.
So what my mother said is true, you are what you eat. So has there been any studies on natural foods you could take to help GLP-1s? That type of thing.
So, I mean, I think high protein is definitely something that you should absolutely be taking. Think more on the striving towards the ketogenic type of diet, where maybe it's ketogenic, not bacon and processed protein, but low low fat kind of protein, I would say. The other thing that's really important, ketogenic diet does a lot like what the GLP-1s do. In fact, it's one of the primary, because you eat less, you're starving, which is similar to a ketogenic diet because your body assumes it's starving. So it switches from a glycolytic, which is a glucose sugar using signaling pathway, to a free fatty acid signaling pathway. And that's how it burns fat, because it chooses fat as the energy source. But one risk is you have to drink a lot of water, because it will dehydrate you, and then you're at risk of getting kidney disease. So drinking a lot of water, adding a lot of protein into your diet, I think are the natural things. A study I read this morning actually was really interesting, is that for women, good news, I've been pushing use of estrogens and progesterones and what do you call it? Hormone replacement therapy for a long time. And when I went to my doctor originally to ask for these medications, she originally told me, I'm not prescribing that for you. And I said, I'm not asking. So I got the medication, and recently, as you saw, there was an overturning of the anti-use of hormone replacement therapies for women who've suffered needlessly for over 20 years because of a paper that was misinterpreted by the media that suggested your increased risk of getting cancer increases by 10%. Well, it's 10% of 1%. So I'll take the 1.1 risk to get hormone replacement. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because this morning a paper came out to suggest that this isn't a natural way, but for women who are taking hormone replacement, there's an additive effect of the GLP-1s for some reason. And they don't quite understand that either.
So by the way, that was a horrible misinterpretation of a study that both science and the mainstream media really promulgated, and it's been relooked at, and Dr. Contreras is totally right about this. 2 comments on on diet. Yes, protein is a great way to go. What I tell patients, and this is philosophical, not necessarily medical, but eating has to some degree, mostly be boring. People who are most successful at controlling their diet have boring diets. So I, for example, eat almost the same thing most of the time, because to me it's a job. It's this fuel. That doesn't mean I don't like to go out to dinner. It doesn't mean I don't want to make a fun dinner. And so it just is for most of my life. If eating is the centerpiece of your life, and by the way, the GLP-1s have caused a lot of social havoc because people settle their life around eating. That's how crazy it gets. So I do the same thing going to in the morning. I have 17 to 20 gram protein yogurt. I put blueberries on it or strawberries or something like that, and a couple of nuts. And I do that every day. And I'm not looking for some fancy breakfast. I got to get out in the morning. It's just something to eat that holds me almost, most of the day. Everyone has their way they'll do that, but eating a bit more protein. Now, there's a lot of debate about protein. I think some of the people like Peter Tia, who's pretty well known, he's a little bit overboard. I don't think you need 2 grams per kilogram, but probably we need more than we're getting. And there's a lot of good things about protein, and it does create more satiety, and the calories are used more efficiently. There's a lot of good things about it, and getting saturated fat out of the diet, simple carbohydrates, reducing all those significantly. Those are just some very basic principles. You do that, and you're a long way towards making yourself healthier.
So Dr. Kelberman is not Greek or Italian. Food is our life.
It is true.
But, if you can have a healthy Mediterranean diet.
It is Greek yogurt that I have.
Yes, I knew. It's not boring. But a Mediterranean type diet where if your food is brown, that's sort of my philosophy. If you look at your plate and everything is brown, that's an indication that you're not making the right choices. So I would say that. So look for leafy greens, look for protein, low in fat, and vegetables, obviously, and fruit, natural sugars.
So what do you think would be so magical about a Mediterranean diet? I mean, the Greeks and Italians are nice, but are they smarter than us too?
Live long.
It could be, but there's two things. Those diets are anti-inflammatory and they're also natural. And I tell you, I've been to a lot of countries in the world, and my favorite place in the world to eat is Greece because the food is so natural and good and simple. And that's a big part of it. And, you know, anything that comes with an ingredient list this long, most of which you don't recognize, get out of it. It's just, we have to eat more naturally. We have to get away from these chemicals. We have to get away from stuff that's invented for us and get back to more natural eating and use a few principles, and you can create a very different environment for yourself. That's really part of the key.
So when I go to the grocery store, I only go to the produce section and the meat section. I rarely will go down the rest of the aisles, just then the dairy, obviously. So I just take the outer circle of the Hannaford's there. We have a question over here.
Yeah. So sometimes when I hear people talking about the Mediterranean diet, I hear them talking an awful lot about grains. And then I hear on the other side of that about the lectins that are in the grains that are maybe inflammatory for some people, yet most people think of grains as being a natural food. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So we have a question about the lectins in grains and your thoughts on whether or not they can be anti-inflammatory
Inflammatory.
or whether or not they can be inflammatory.
So I hear that all the time about tomatoes and eggplant and so on. I don't know what people are talking about. I mean, I honestly, that is like the staple of a Mediterranean diet is tomato, and eggplant and a lot of seedy things and also grains, but they're not processed. That's one of the major differences. And I will tell you, I don't understand it. Maybe Dr. Kelberman, but the fruit and the vegetables, the potatoes, the eggplants, the tomatoes, they taste different in Europe than they do here. And I wonder if part of that anti-inflammatory is a processing issue in the United States, because a lot of our vegetables and fruits are frozen before they get to us and usually rotten by the time we eat them. So I don't know if that may play a role.
I don't think there's any doubt that it plays a role. So I'll be less on the fence. That's gobbledygook. Processed food is the enemy. You don't want processed food. There's nothing good that comes out of processed food. And, I had some organic blueberries the other day because I sort of buy into that. I don't know. But we cleaned them, and I cannot believe the stuff that came off of them. And I'm just telling you, it is, in defense of some people, it's hard to eat healthy in this country because the industry is aligned against you, and they have the support of government and politics, whoever, but they're just not held to account, and it really makes it hard. So we got to be able to cut people a little bit of grace, but that doesn't mean we give up. But I agree. I think that food is hyper processed here. I think that who knows what goes on with, look what we find out about microplastics in the last few years, things like that. The whole processed industry is a danger to us. And how much inflammation is that fueling? So it's a lot to take in. You can't reinvent the entire world, but you can start in certain places. And I think I would tell you, if you make it too complicated for people, you're going to have this much success. You got to make it relatively easy in the beginning. People have to achieve some success. The enemy of good is perfect. Food studies are the hardest studies in the world to do because they're complicated and you can't control everything else. And you have to go by how people report what they do and all this. So food research has really lagged and it's made it very difficult. But you have to go on some principles and do the best you can with science. I hope we get better at it. But we are just, I don't think I'm speaking out of school. We just do it poorly. And there's so much room for improvement. that even getting from here to here is gonna make a big difference.
And I would say the only place where I would say you would want to be cautious about eating seedy things and grains is if you have inflammation in the gut already, diverticulitis or some type of Crohn's, that kind of thing, because that would just create more inflammation. But if you have a healthy gut, I don't think that that's an issue. And then to Dr. Kelberman's point, microplastics, and then you got to decide, do you take fish that's been in the bacteria of, somebody's, tank, or do you eat the mercury from the ocean? It's a catch-22 these days. I mean, the food is just not the way it was even 50 years ago. And that's, a bigger problem than we have time to talk about today. And then the other problem is we talk about eating healthy, eating foods that aren't brown. But I came from Boston. I used to live in a neighborhood called Jamaica Plain. It's a largely Dominican community. And there was a grocery store there. It was an up and coming rising art community, let's just say, but people didn't have a lot of money in that part of Boston. And the grocery store had a produce section about this big, and it had a meat section of unrecognizable meats, actually, about that big. And the majority of the store was sodas, potato chips, processed things. It's a socioeconomic problem. And that's the other part of the GLP-1, which, is worth really talking about, which is in part making me angry. It's not accessible to people who need it, who really do need it, because it's so expensive, and insurance companies are still not covering the cost of taking that medication. So that is a bigger problem that we need to be thinking about. How do we resolve that? Because if you think about a geographic map of the United States, and you look at who is at the highest risk of cardiovascular disease and death as a consequence of heart failure, it's primarily in locations in the South where people tend to have a BMI index greater than 30. Those are the people, and those are mostly the people who socioeconomically can't afford the medications that can help save their lives.
Well, pharmaceutical companies, why do they do these things? Because they can. And most of their rules that they create are what I said earlier, gobbledygook. They're not science-based. They're just things that they put out there. And why do they get away with it? Because they can. It's just very, very frustrating. But here's a quiz, because you've been listening for a long time now. So you have to make one question, a little bit like school. So if you lose weight on your own and you change your diet a little bit, how we spoke, what do you think happens to your inflammatory markers? Do they go up, down, or stay the same? They plummet, usually by more than half. So that's a biochemical marker that's sort of the proof in the pudding. So you can do a lot of what a GLP-1 does. I admit it's not easy, but you can do it in a sense naturally. You can create your own anti-inflammatory environment by eating healthy and keeping your body weight under control.
Jason, do you want to pass the microphone around?
Here, I can. Okay.
I was on Ozempic. I was at 215 pounds. My A1C was way high. I was pre-diabetic. I lost 50 pounds on it. My A1C leveled out. Ozempic, I got put in the donut hole. So that to buy that was too much for me to do. So I quit altogether. My question is, you said something about stopping it was not good for you,
Just that you gained back the weight.
but I didn't. The reason I gained back the weight was when I had vertigo, which I've had since October. This is my chauffeur. Ozempic itself, for me, helped me, my knees, the inflammation in my knees to move around. I didn't take it for obesity. I took it for my A1C. But I was also told that once you're diabetic, you're always diabetic. Can you kind of talk about the diabetes with the Ozempic a little bit more?
Well, so first of all, I have given GLP-1s to hundreds and hundreds of people. And I can tell you stories that you wouldn't believe. So the notion that GLP-1s can't accomplish their goal, they can, if short term anyway. And it is an extremely potent diabetic drug. A1Cs plummet because of some of the things that it enhances insulin release, creates much more insulin sensitivity. As I won't go through the complicated biochemical stuff, but it all happens, and it's amazing that this drug does all that. So that's a good thing. I mean, we don't know anything bad about that. What Dr. Contreras was referring to, and by the way, not everybody gains the weight back. A lot of people do. And if they've done perhaps what you may have done or others have done, there are some people who've been sick. Look, I've had people, not a lot. I had one guy today, as a matter of fact. He's just unbelievable what he's done. He has changed his life more dramatically than any human being I've ever seen. That I almost brought him today because but he has done it. He's done just something I've almost never seen. So you can do these things. They're just hard and they don't happen for most people. So yes, there are amazing. I've had people on GLP-1s that it has changed their life. So there's one person I've known for many years. Their personality was always weird. They wouldn't go out and they wouldn't talk to people. And they always seemed unhappy. They got on the GLP-1 and they lost a ton of weight. It's unbelievable what's happened to this person. They've gained their energy level has expanded dramatically. Her personality's changed. She's now expanded parts of her life, like her father, relationship with her father, and all these other things that she wasn't willing to go near because now she's in a better mental state. It is amazing. So, yes, in many ways, I certainly am a fan in certain instances. It's not that you shouldn't use GLP-1s. It's just you should use them wisely, and you should use them with the understanding that we're still learning things about them. So it's a great diabetic drug. If you haven't gained your weight back, that's terrific. What I tend to do with people is I try, and people do plateau after a while. You don't lose weight forever. I try and then bring the dose in line with something that enables them to stay plateaued. So I think if you can use less, we try and use less. I don't know what will happen a year from now. We're getting information every month about this. And so we're learning on the fly a little bit.
And I would say the most information about this drug is available for those who were diabetics or who are diabetics. And to your point, once you're diagnosed with diabetes, you will always have diabetes, but the insulin sensitivity can alter if you lose weight. So if you lose weight, you become more insulin sensitive, and therefore you may not even need insulin shots at some point if you lose enough weight and your sensitivity comes back, but you will always have that propensity. And so for you, if you haven't gained back your weight, it sounds like you've made wonderful life choices that are keeping you where you should be. And that's a congratulatory thing for you. So good job.
I probably don't need it. I just have a question and then just was gonna tell you why I'm here. Can we be tested to see what our inflammation markers are? Like, can I go to my nurse practitioner and say, I'd like to know how much inflammation my body has?
There's some very straightforward, simple tests. You can get tests for almost anything. I could give you a menu of tests that you would not believe. The problem is they're not all that helpful and you can't act upon them. So it's a lot of money spent without a lot of bang. But there's a series of tests you can get that are useful that most doctors don't really understand. You know, doctors didn't learn about this stuff in medical school. Unless you're super inquisitive and a little bit crazy, you have to read all of them. And you got to be on these webinars. You got to go, you got to grab the guy after the conference and pin him down and talk to him. They run the other way when I'm at these conferences because I want to know, I got you here. But you can get a high sensitivity CRP. That's probably the most common and available sensitive test. That's a general inflammation marker. If you have rheumatoid arthritis that's active, that'll go up too. But that generally is the marker that they're using. There are more sophisticated inflammatory markers, as Dr. Contreras said. They're not really used in prime time, and we don't know how to use them. So a high sensitivity CRP, if that's rock bottom, that's a good sign that you don't have excess inflammation going on.
And then whether the insurance company will cover the test or the blood.
They will cover
blood
that test. They will cover
They
that
will?
test. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I read on, there's a book out about the myth about cholesterol. It's a recent book, I know, because I'm trying not to be on a statin. And I tried, you know, I did the healthy thing, fit body, you know, just, but it still went up.
It's really
My
not a
cholesterol-
myth about cholesterol. It's really a poor understanding of cholesterol. And the default position in this country is to sell drugs. You know, it just is. And so if you understand cholesterol, you can treat it wisely. It's the shotgun approach of number high, give pill, make better. That is not a true statement, everybody. That's the problem.
And it's
I
a
know
ratio. It's the ratio of your LDL to your HDL. Because if that ratio is normal, so my LDL is borderline. I love food. But my HDL is actually really high, so my risk factors actually decrease as a consequence.
Go into your lipid profiles, all of you, everybody, including Dr. Contreras. Look at your triglyceride to HDL ratio. That is a much better marker of your inflammatory risk. If that's one is great, two is okay. Anything higher, three and up, you're not in good metabolic shape. That group of people will get many more diseases, much more problems going forward. You have to work to change that. And actually, taking a medication that's currently available and lowering that triglyceride doesn't change your risk, because it's changed by everything we've been talking about tonight, not by a pill that pulls that number down. So that's an easy thing. It's widely available, and you can get a much better understanding of where you are. HDL is very confusing. We need to raise our hand and say, you know what? We don't understand it. It's gone full circle in my professional career. There's sub-fractions of it that we don't understand. There's, it's supposed to be a scavenger, apolipoprotein that takes in some of the bad fat and all that, but we simply don't understand it well enough. But we do understand inflammation, triglycerides, HDL, and you can improve your situation dramatically by eating healthy and pulling those triglycerides down. That's a really easy thing to look at.
I was gonna tell you why I came to it. Everywhere you go, they want, Noom website, Weight Watchers website. I follow someone that exercises. She eats right, goes to Planet Fitness, she's very good. I've been following her because her lifestyle has changed. But she's sharing that she wants us to take the GLP-1s to microdose, and she did it, and she's like a beanpole now. But it's like all of society, everybody's pushing the GLP-1s. I think more for weight loss, but there's side effects out there. And why is it all
Just
over?
remember,
This GLP is all over everywhere, and it's for weight loss, and I don't know that.
you
it should
haven't
be
seen
that way.
anything yet. When these new ones come out, the ones that are currently available, that they're charging you so much, they're gonna be begging you to use it. So you're gonna get inundated. So Eli Lilly makes over $30 billion a year from this. They're the first company in the world that's a non-tech company to be worth $1 trillion. This is insanity, okay? I hope you realize that. This is absolute insanity that these companies are able to create that value, but they're doing it on the backs of you. So microdosing is a story. We have no idea about that. As little as we know about the other, we know even less about microdosing, whether it works, whether it creates the same environment, whether it's a good strategy. We don't know. That person on the web is living in America, and they can say whatever they want, and they're allowed to. And it's just buyer beware.
Probably getting paid.
And probably
She does it through, she gives you a company, I think it's ELLE. and you go to their website and a doctor will talk to you and subscribe you your dose based, it is medically, a doctor does talk to you. But I'm just saying that's like the thing these days, and that's like, how healthy is it? Like, I'm just gonna go on and trust this doctor, on this website, talk to him, and he's gonna give me this medicine, and what are the side effects?
So if that's okay, I would love to talk about this because this is my big thing when we talk about it in the lab. Again, for individuals who have risk for cardiovascular disease that, are making a decision between I'm going to do nothing about my cardiovascular disease. If I don't lose weight, I'm going to die. They should take these medications. For people who need to lose, which I don't think you need to lose any weight, but if say somebody needed to lose 10, 20 pounds, there are risks associated with it. And Dr. Kelberman can talk about this and back me up, but what we know from the 20 years that these medications were being used for is that, number one, pancreatitis, and there is a small risk of increased incidence of pancreatic cancer, which is not good. Thyroid cancer is another potential risk. And I can tell you that someone close to the MMRI was taking these medications and actually did get thyroid cancer as a consequence of taking these medications. There is peristalsis, which your gut has a certain movement to it. And these medications reduce or sometimes halts altogether the movement of your bowel, which can rupture and you can die. My admin knows somebody where that happened to them. I mean, these are real people in our community where this has happened. There is this potential risk of having a number of other problems with your bone loss, your muscle mass loss. And then, like I said before, for most people, it's easy to slip back into your habits. So you stop taking these medications and you develop, your body compensates. You no longer have GLP-1s in circulation. You reset back into your original metabolic profile. And so you get hyperphagia, which means you can't stop eating. You're hungry all the time, and it's hard to satiate. So there are real risks. You have to decide. My point here today is to just tell you this, like any medication. So I was a pharmacology PhD. I don't like to take any medications. None of them are risk-free, in my view. You trade one set of problems for another set of problems, and you decide which one you can tolerate more. This is one where you have to make a decision. And again, it's a long-term decision. Not many people can stop taking these medications once they start taking them. We know that based on the evidence from what we see from the 20-year study. There are improvements to cardiovascular risk, decreased inflammation, but you don't have increased inflammation or cardiovascular risk if you only need to lose 10 or 20 pounds. That's only true if you have an exorbitant amount of weight that is burdening your organs and your tissue. That's when you need to take these medications. So I'm just erring on the side of caution. 10 or 20 pounds you can lose by making exercise decisions, dietary decisions, other things in your lifestyle that can improve.
Make it even a little more complicated. Even when you're obese, you have to have someone with a brain to evaluate your overall risk. I had one person who was 330 pounds. I was astonished when I started to check him out. He was so metabolically healthy, I couldn't believe it. So he wanted to lose a little weight, and we did do that. And he's off the medication now, and he's actually transitioned pretty well. But I said, you're here, not here. Here's 10 things that tell you that. So you need someone who understands this, and there aren't many people who do, who can actually work through you with this, because every medication has, I just told you about that pill. And the wrong dose, delivered the wrong way, it's poison. And the right dose for the right person, it can be a miracle. And you have to really understand that the way it's portrayed, like with this people take all sorts of license with their initials after their name and all this, And people will say and do a lot of things, and they may believe it, but that doesn't make it true. It's very easy in this society to be fooled. So I have a lot of people whose risk is up here. That's true. And we discuss at length what the potential benefits are, exit strategies. We do an assessment of them before we even start it. What is the real risk? And that's what you really have to do. So I think, we'll learn more about these drugs. It has a role, but it should not be used ad lib like this. And using it to lose 10 pounds is ridiculous. I mean, it's just such a bad strategy because to keep those 10 pounds off, you're gonna have to take it for the rest of your life unless you do something else. And that's a really bad trade to make. That's just not worth it. So it can be very nuanced. We're trying to portray some of the decision making that has to go into it. And it is, look, to someone who works in these areas, this is exciting. Look, we don't not like this stuff. We love exciting new things. We just want to see it used properly, understood well, and not abused.
Comment, and this segues into something a little bit more from a higher level. I understand for each person, they're going to make that individual decision. Is this what I need to do for me? Is it a health risk for me? For society as a whole right now, I'm very concerned. So you went and you got Twitter and what's that chat thing, the chat box or whatever these kids use, and they thought it was going to be great communication, and this great technology came out, and now you have depressed kids that should no longer be on phones, that are addicted to technology, and the unintended consequences of something everybody thought was going to be great is terrible. And the unintended consequences of everybody looking like a supermodel is not good. So I have a daughter, she's got an eating disorder. These kids all think that now everybody can be skinny and everybody can look perfect. And the unintended consequence of what happens when everybody takes GLP-1s to lose weight, not to feel better, not to help their joints, not to reduce inflammation. This impact, for the reason that this drug is being distributed, is absolutely destructive to the society and our kids. And I don't know if that goes at a doctor level. I mean, it does. When you have someone that's coming to you and they really just want to lose 10 pounds, and then somehow we give them access for that reason, then that's pushed that way. But again, there's supposed to be something bigger than all of this that allows things to be used, whether it's AI, whether it's Twitter, whether it's social media, whatever it is. There's got to be governing for society that allows these things to be used for their proper purpose and their proper way. Otherwise, you have really bad societal consequences. That's not even a question. It's just my concern.
No, but it's a great point, a great point. And really, it speaks, and I'm sorry to be so critical of this, but it really speaks to a dysfunctional healthcare system because these are roles that physicians should hold. They should be have the time and energy to put towards that type of stuff, talking to kids, helping them understand these things, because kids are particularly susceptible to this. And instead, they're doing all sorts of other things that are mandated that are probably waste of time. That's a whole nother discussion, but that's a really good point. And even though you're talking about kids, it does extend a little bit into adults too, and for sure.
I have two comments about that. The first is, I study rare children's disorders, and they have mutations that affect the same signaling pathway. And I often show pictures of the kids with different mutations in the same pathway and how they look more like each other than they do their families. And I think about that a lot when I see some people with the plastic surgery face. They all look the same. The lips, the eyes. I was in Miami for a conference. They were indistinguishable. They all looked exactly the same. It will change our society to be all the same. We don't want to all be the same. But the pressures that this causes for individuals, I think, is enormous. And then there's the ethical dilemma when physicians should probably say, this isn't the right medication for you. If you look at what GLP-1s and the like are meant to do and who they're meant to be treating. It's individuals who have comorbidities. They're not just overweight. They're overweight and have high risk of cardiovascular disease. They're overweight and they have high cholesterol or high blood pressure or something else, apnea, all these other things. Those are the people who should be on these medications. But because all the movie stars are going on, their platforms, and now we have access to seeing all of these changes, and they're, going from like, I don't know, being beautiful as they were to now skinny and very beautiful. Everybody wants to be that. So it's a question of holding our clinical folks, I think, accountable for prescribing this for the right purpose and not prescribing it to just anybody because they want to lose 10 pounds for the wedding. I use that as an example. So I agree with you. I think we need to be cautious because we still don't know. We don't know the consequence. And for 10 pounds, as Dr. Kelberman said, you're giving yourself a lifelong sentence of taking medication every day or every week. Or every day if it's the oral pill. You're not, very rarely can you stop taking it because the consequences of coming back is even worse.
But the point of, yeah, I agree with you. If you go to therapy, they cut you off after a certain period of time if you're not making progress. So, and the insurance says, I'm sorry, we're not gonna pay for that anymore. You're not getting to where you need to get, you're not putting in the effort. So if you're taking this as a tool to get to a place, okay, great, it's a tool. You make the lifestyle changes, you do what you gotta do, but after a year, if you haven't made the changes, you're probably not gonna be eligible. You should be at this place. Why would you cover it forever?
Well, that's the problem.
It's not a solution.
Insurance companies aren't really I don't even know if they're covering it for comorbidities or not, but they're not covering it for the majority of people. And to your point about the social outlook, well, it might be, but it's not prescribed, in which case people are taking it, but not getting the really critical advice on how to take it. But the other thing about your point is, as I mentioned before, it's a socioeconomic problem. And so when these wealthier families are taking this medication, and now you've got the socioeconomic deprived group that can't afford to take these medications, now you create more disparity between the groups. And I think that's a bigger problem that we have to think about in the future than now. Because they're not going to get the same access that somebody who has access to cash does.
I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. I'm not here for me. I'm actually here for my wife. But just to give you a little background, I did gastric bypass. I was a professional, semi-pro athlete. I've been in sports my entire life. And no matter what I did, I always had to fight weight. Some of it was, most of it was muscle, but still, I was heavy. So anyway, the gastric bypass for me worked great. Okay, it may not work for everybody. My wife, however, is one other thing I want to say. Thing about doctors, top of the class, bottom of the class, you still call them doctor. So make sure, just because a doctor's overseeing something, I guarantee you a doctor in that program is getting paid by whoever it is. Plus, they may not be of greatest medical merit. But in any case, my wife has dementia. Unfortunately, the best drug working for her makes her eat nonstop. So the reason I'm here is because, I want to find out about this because in her case, you can't tell somebody who's got dementia they can't eat stuff. Because they'll get up in the middle of the night when you're sleeping and eat it anyway. So that's why I'm interested in this, is because it'll at least hopefully offset some of that from the medication.
Let me say two things. You're just pointing out how important it is to understand everything about a patient and what you're trying to do for them. That includes everything, where they are, where they're going, what their issues are, what's most important to them. There is no stock answer for people like that. If you trust your physician and you have a good relationship with them, you can talk to them like this. And this is what I say to people. if it were me, and I was dealing with dementia, which is not an easy thing to deal with, and I could, at that point in time, I'm talking about making life as good as it can be and not worrying about the length of time. That's just, this is how I'm thinking. This is more common sense than medical, but if there is a tool that can be used with a reasonable degree of safety and can make your life better, I'm going to use that tool. That's me. Now you can weigh that carefully, but that to me is how you make those kinds of decisions. That's why it's so important that you understand the circumstances of the individual you're talking to, because there's times when we can say a bunch of stuff and then say, oh, well, not for that, because it's that specific. The second thing that's sort of interesting that you raised, and very few people know this. So one of my good friends is the cardiologist for the NFL. And these giant linemen, they're huge today. I mean, they're 300 plus pounds. Their BMIs aren't good, accurate measures of their overall adiposity because there's so much muscle and fat because they just get bigger and bigger. That's sumo wrestlers also. So this is something that they don't tell anybody because they don't want it to get out because they think it might have a negative implication. But there has been a huge percentage of these people dying by their mid-50s because they retire and they don't change their habits, which is eating tons of calories. And the muscle starts to turn to fat. The inflammation must be off through the roof. I can't imagine. But they are within 20 years of retiring. Many of them are dying of cardiac events, strokes, things like that. So the NFL is trying to figure out a way, can we help these people without telling the public, because the public will naturally think, well, that's terrible that we watch these people for entertainment and then let them die by their mid-50s. But it just goes, it's just another thing you reminded me of, another thing about this physiology, how dangerous. But anyway, the answer to me, not to give medical advice, and then I'm a big proponent of knowing all the details before you give advice, but just on the surface, that sounds like something that could help you in your situation.
So I think we're going to wrap this up, but if you guys would like to make some closing remarks, that would be great.
I just want to say thank you all for coming to our inaugural MMRI series. I hope you found this really helpful. I hope you'll have an opportunity to consider taking a tour after the events tonight to see the kind of research that we do here at MMRI, some of which includes coming up with medications better than Ozempics and the like that have less side effects and are going to help with cardiovascular disease and other side effects associated with obesity and diabetes. So thank you again for coming, and I appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, I'll thank all of you for coming. I'll thank Dr. Contreras and the Masonic Medical Research Institute for the invitation. Like I say, this is fun for me. This is as good as going to a movie. So I'm up for it anytime everyone else is up for it, because this is just important stuff to talk about. And we all learn a lot from each other every time we do this. So I'm appreciative of the opportunity.
And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Kelberman for taking time off to be here outside of the clinic, to be here with us tonight. This has been such an incredible discussion, and I hope that everybody walked away with learning something today. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to either of us. I know we'd be happy to answer any of your burning thoughts and questions. So I hope you have a wonderful evening and make good choices.